Part 1, The Route. The bus's engine groaned against the chilly dawn as it pulled away from the depot. Its faded white paint, streaked with grime and rust at the wheel wells, bore the insignia of Jefferson Unified School District, though few students ever called it that. To them, it was just Bus 47, the last route on the southern edge of the district, stretching out into the desert towns where sand-buried street signs and jackrabbits darted between weeds. Cal Monroe, the driver, had been behind that particular wheel for 15 years. A retired Army mechanic with a rigid spine and a voice like sandpaper, Cal didn't say much. He had a habit of showing up 20 minutes early, thermos in hand, eyes hidden behind aviator sunglasses even before sunrise. He didn't play music. He didn't tolerate shoving. And until last Thursday, his routes were uneventful. That Thursday started the same as all the rest. At 6:32 a.m., Cal pulled up to the Desert Willow Mobile Park, the first stop of the morning. 3 kids boarded, 2 girls chatting about TikToks, and a boy in a faded hoodie, maybe 12, who always kept his backpack on his lap. Cal only knew his name because it was once screamed by a frantic mother who missed the bus, Toby. Toby sat near the back that morning, as he usually did. Cal noticed he was unusually quiet. That wasn't saying much, Toby was always quiet, but this time he looked sunken. Pale. His eyes didn't flick around like they normally did. Instead, he stared forward, blinking rapidly, his small hands clutching the seat in front of him. Cal glanced in the mirror a few times. Something was off. The next few stops added more noise, more students, but Cal kept his eye on the boy in the back. When he hit a bump near the abandoned rest stop, the one covered in graffiti and surrounded by chain-link fence, he saw Toby jump like he'd been shocked. The kid twisted around in his seat, peering beneath it. Cal frowned. At the next light, he called out without turning, "You all right, Toby?" No answer. Then, when Cal looked up again, he saw it. Toby was crying. Not loud sobs. Just tears, silently streaking down his cheeks. And more alarmingly, he was looking under his seat again. Not just looking, reaching. Cal gritted his teeth. Something was wrong. He threw on the hazard lights, pulled over on Old Quarry Road, and stood up. The kids behind him muttered. A few laughed. But when Cal started down the aisle, they fell silent. "Toby," he said. "What are you reaching for?" The boy didn't look up. His hand was still down beneath the seat. "I dropped it," Toby whispered. "Dropped what?" Toby didn't answer. Cal crouched, grumbling as his knees cracked, and peered under the bench seat. At first he saw nothing but the dust and grime typical of a school bus. But then, just past the metal leg of the seat, something else. A glint. A reflection of metal. He reached under, brushing aside some gum wrappers and a pencil stub. His hand hit something cold. And then he froze. Wrapped in duct tape, nestled in a clear plastic bag, was a small, blood-stained hunting knife. The handle had initials scratched into the side, JB. And beneath it, barely visible inside the clear bag, was something else. A photograph. Faded. Old. Torn. But unmistakably of a woman, smiling, sitting on a rock in the desert, with the exact same eyes as Toby. Cal slowly pulled the bag out and stood up. The entire bus was silent. He looked back at Toby, who was now sobbing quietly. "Don't tell them," the boy said. "Please." Cal didn't answer. He walked slowly to the front, shut the door, grabbed the CB radio, and with a steady voice said. "Base, this is 47. I need law enforcement out at Old Quarry Road. We've got a situation." Part 2, The Photograph. The photograph slipped from Cal's fingers as he waited beside the bus, the desert wind toying with its edges like it knew something he didn't. It had been 23 minutes since he called dispatch. The kids had been evacuated, seated in the shade of a nearby mesquite bush, under the watchful eye of a substitute driver who happened to be nearby. Cal remained by the steps of bus 47, one hand on the railing, the other holding the evidence bag. The knife. The photo. The weight of the boy's words. Don't tell them. Please. He couldn't shake the look in Toby's eyes, not fear, exactly. Something deeper. Like resignation. The first patrol car arrived with a howl of sirens that died down to a whisper as it pulled to the side of the road. Dust billowed up in its wake. Out stepped Deputy Alicia Ramirez, lean and precise in her movements, mirrored sunglasses reflecting the long shadow of the bus. "Morning, Cal," she said, hand resting on her belt. "Heard you found something strange." Cal simply handed her the bag. She took one look and exhaled sharply. "This real blood? Looks like it. Where'd it come from?" "Under the kid's seat. Boy named Toby. Lives at Desert Willow. Doesn't talk much." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "And he say where it came from?" "No," Cal said. "But he was crying. Scared. Like he knew it was there before I found it." She studied him for a moment, then opened the passenger door and stepped aboard. The bus was empty now, rows of seats eerily quiet without the usual noise. The scent of vinyl and dust clung to everything. She crouched at the seat Cal had pointed out, flashlight in hand. "Fresh?" she asked. Cal shook his head. "Could have been there for years. Nobody looks under those seats." The deputy didn't respond for a while. Then she muttered, "You ever seen this boy with anyone, strange?" "Not that I noticed. But. Cal hesitated. "The photo. That woman. She looked familiar. You know her?" "I think I saw a missing person flyer once, back in the late 90s. A woman with those same eyes. Same face." Ramirez stood upright. "You're saying this photo might be from a 20-year-old case?" "I'm saying it's possible." She looked again at the knife. "And these initials, JB, ring any bells?" "No." Ramirez stepped back out, radioed it in, and soon more vehicles arrived. CSI. A detective in an unmarked SUV. A child welfare officer. By 10 a.m., Toby had been separated from the other students and quietly escorted into the back seat of a government-issue sedan. He didn't protest. He didn't even look up. Back at the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, Detective Marcus Dell, freshly reassigned from homicide, reviewed the evidence with a grim face. Dell was in his early 50s, a broad-shouldered man with heavy eyelids and a fondness for silence. He held the photograph in gloved hands, examining it with a magnifying glass. "Color degradations consistent with film from the early 90s, he murmured. "Kodak Gold, probably." "Do we know who she is?" Ramirez asked. "Not yet. But I'll run it through NAMAS and VICAP. See if anything pings." "And the boy?" "He hasn't said much. Told the counselor his name's Toby Bray. Lives with his stepfather. Mother's been missing for years. No official report filed." Ramirez blinked. "You're telling me she's been gone and nobody filed anything?" Dell gave a dry smile. "Happens more than you think." Meanwhile, as the lab processed the knife and local records were combed for matches to the initials JB, Cal sat on his porch with a cup of black coffee, staring into the desert. He couldn't shake the feeling that the boy hadn't placed the knife there recently. That maybe, just maybe, it had been waiting to be found. And if that was true, who put it there? Why that seat? And why now? That night, Cal pulled out an old file box from his garage. Yellowed papers. Stacks of newspaper clippings. One headline caught his eye. 1993, young mother disappears after night shift at diner, still no leads. Her name, June Bray. And in the photo beside the headline, she was smiling in the same way as the torn photo found on the bus. It wasn't just resemblance. It was her. Part 3, The Stepfather. The Bray residence sat at the far end of Cactus Lane, where the pavement gave up and the sand began to reclaim what had once been a road. Desert Willow Mobile Park wasn't on any tourist maps, and it wasn't hard to see why. Every trailer leaned slightly to one side. Satellite dishes rusted in the sun. Kids played barefoot among broken furniture and car parts. When Detective Marcus Dell and Deputy Ramirez knocked on the door of trailer number 19, they were met by a long pause. Then the sound of shuffling. Something heavy being moved. A lock undone. The man who opened the door was tall, sunburnt, and heavy in the face. He wore a dirty flannel shirt and had a cigarette tucked behind his ear. "Yeah. Mr. Donnie Kerr?" Dell asked. "Who's asking?" "Detective Dell, Sheriff's Department. This is Deputy Ramirez. Mind if we ask you a few questions about your stepson, Toby?" Kerr snorted. "What did he do now?" "He's not in trouble," Ramirez said. "We just need to verify some information." Kerr opened the door wider. The inside smelled of beer, old carpet, and something faintly metallic. "Come in, I guess." The living room was small, a worn recliner, a folding table, one bare bulb overhead. A massive TV stood dark in the corner. Kerr sat on the edge of the couch, arms crossed. "What's this about?" "We found something under Toby's bus seat this morning," Dell said. "A knife. Wrapped in tape. Along with a photograph." At this, Kerr's jaw twitched. "A knife? You recognize this woman?" Ramirez passed him a copy of the photo. Kerr stared at it. His fingers twitched, then curled. "Where'd you get this?" "As we said. From the bus. Toby's seat." "That's June," he said finally. "Toby's mama. When was the last time you saw her?" Kerr took a long breath. "She ran off. 1998, told me she was going to visit her cousin in Bakersfield. Never came back." "You didn't report her missing?" "She'd done it before," Kerr muttered. "I figured she'd come back when she cooled off." "She didn't. I raised Toby myself." Dell's expression didn't change. "And this knife? Ever seen it before?" "Nope. It has the initials JB scratched into the handle." "That's supposed to mean something to me." "You tell us," Ramirez said. Kerr stood. "Look, I don't know what this is, but Toby's a weird kid. Always has been. Spends too much time digging around junk, reading weird stuff. Maybe he found that knife out in the desert. Maybe he's trying to get attention. But I didn't do anything." "Did you ever hit him?" Dell asked suddenly. Kerr glared. "Watch yourself. That wasn't a denial. You can check the school files. Never laid a hand on him." Ramirez took a slow step forward. "Did June ever mention anyone with those initials?" "JB? Hell if I know. She had plenty of friends. Co-workers. Old boyfriends. She wasn't exactly a nun." Dell nodded slowly, rising to his feet. "We'll be in touch." As they left the trailer, Ramirez glanced back once, just in time to see Kerr throw the photo into the trash. That evening, Dell sat at his desk going through every missing persons case from the early 1990s with the initials, JB, in connection. June Bray had been listed in a handful of internal memos, a possible runaway, but never officially declared missing due to a lack of complaint. The knife's DNA had been fast-tracked. Preliminary results: human blood, likely female. Still awaiting match. The biggest surprise came not from the evidence, but from a curious phone call to the station. A woman claiming to have seen Toby Bray, alone, at an abandoned gas station on Route 9, 2 weeks ago, just before sunrise. She swore he had been digging near the old sign with a metal detector. Meanwhile, Cal couldn't sleep. He found himself driving the same bus route in his mind, over and over, picturing the exact spot where the boy had sat. How long had the knife been there? How long had Toby known it was there? And why would he cry the day it was discovered, unless he'd seen something he didn't understand? Or, worse, something he did. The next morning, Cal made a quiet decision. He would go back to the place where the knife had been found, the seat itself, and this time, he'd take it apart. Not just check underneath. He'd unbolt the entire thing. And what he found would blow the case wide open. Part 4, What's Hidden in Metal. It was early Saturday morning when Cal Monroe returned to Bus 47. The lot was quiet, the sun just beginning to rise over the flat desert horizon. The keys were still in his locker, no one had touched the bus since the incident. He brought his own tools. An old ratchet set, flashlight, gloves. Years in the army had taught him how to disassemble just about anything that rolled. By 6:14 a.m., he was crouched by the seat where Toby had sat, tools in hand. The bus smelled of cold metal and stale rubber. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching on the edges of dust particles that swirled in the air. The seat was bolted to the floor in 4 places. He worked slowly, methodically, unscrewing the rusted bolts and sliding the bench forward. When it finally came free, Cal stopped. The floor beneath was uneven, not from age or use, but from something deliberately done. One of the floor panels had been cut and welded back into place. Sloppy welding, hidden under layers of dust and dried chewing gum. Unless you were looking for it, you'd never notice. Cal took out a small flathead screwdriver and wedged it under the seam. It popped free with a screech of metal. Inside, beneath the false floor, was a shallow compartment. And inside that compartment was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, tightly sealed with twine. Cal hesitated, then opened it. Out spilled a second knife, smaller than the first, but similarly marked. A child's bracelet, pink and plastic, cracked. A stack of photographs, all aged, all of the same woman, June Bray, in different locations across the desert. A notebook, water-damaged but mostly legible. And, disturbingly, a small, empty medicine vial labeled with a faded hospital sticker. Patient, Bray, June, sedative use only. 10 milligrams. Cal didn't breathe for a moment. The photos were clearly taken without her knowing. Long lens. Distant. A woman alone, drinking coffee, feeding a dog, walking along a dirt trail. A few were, closer. One showed her sleeping on a couch, visibly unaware. In another, she was looking over her shoulder, eyes wide, caught mid-step. These weren't family memories. These were surveillance. And the notebook? It was filled with dates, locations, coordinates, and, on certain pages, single words repeated again and again. She remembers. She knows. Keep the boy away. JB is watching. Back at the sheriff's office, Detective Dell reviewed a fresh DNA report. The blood on the original knife matched tissue samples found at a shallow grave discovered in the desert outside Yucca Ridge in 2004. The body had never been identified, listed as Jane Doe 1498. The woman had blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, and no ID. Now, 21 years later, she had a name. June Bray. They brought Toby back in. The child psychologist tried gentle questioning, but it wasn't working. Dell decided to speak to him directly, alone. In the small, softly lit interview room, Dell knelt beside Toby's chair. "You're not in trouble," he said quietly. "But we need to know how that knife got under your seat." Toby didn't speak at first. Then, finally, "I didn't put it there." "Do you know who did?" The boy nodded. Dell leaned closer. "Who?" Toby looked up, voice barely a whisper. "The man in the hat." Back in his office, Dell stared at the phrase written on his notepad. The man in the hat. It sounded like a child's monster. Something out of a bedtime story. But Cal's findings, the hidden compartment, the notebook, the surveillance photos, pointed to something far more disturbing. A person, possibly someone close, had been stalking June Bray. Watching her. Following her. Drugging her. And somehow, the boy remembered enough to be terrified of it all. The initials JB. The hidden cash under the seat. The surveillance photos. And now, the man in the hat. Dell made a decision. He would go back through every staff file, every bus driver, every maintenance worker, every mechanic who'd ever been assigned to Bus 47 in the past 30 years. One of them knew something. One of them had hidden that cash. And one of them might still be watching. Part 5, Bus 47's History. Detective Marcus Dell sat late into the night at the County Archive building, surrounded by file boxes labeled with faded stickers. School District Transport Records, 1989 to 2005. He was looking for ghosts, not the dead, but those who had passed through unnoticed. The first surprise came fast. Bus 47 had not always been Bus 47. In 1993, it had been numbered Bus 19, operated by a company called Desert Valley Transportation, contracted by the district for rural pickups. The record showed a steady rotation of drivers, most of whom had retired or moved away, except one name that appeared 5 years in a row. Jackie Burrows. Initials, JB. Dell leaned back in his chair. Burrows had been a part-time driver and full-time groundskeeper at Pine Creek Elementary, where June Bray had once worked as a cafeteria assistant before her disappearance. According to the records, Burrows had abruptly left the job in late 1998, around the same time June was last seen alive. No resignation letter. No forwarding address. Just, gone. Meanwhile, Cal Monroe returned to the hidden compartment to retrieve the one item he hadn't reported to the authorities yet, the notebook. Something about it had felt personal. Dangerous. It was full of paranoia, strange ramblings, and coordinates. The writing changed styles halfway through, block letters became spidery cursive, with entire passages crossed out violently. One particular entry caught Cal's eye. June found the photos. She confronted me. Said she remembered. She screamed. I didn't want to. I didn't mean to. But she wouldn't stop. And beneath that, scratched over and over. The boy saw. He always saw. He sees me still. Cal copied the GPS coordinates from one of the early pages and plugged them into a map app on his phone. The point lay 12 miles northeast of town, deep in a patch of desert between two abandoned mine shafts. He didn't call the police. He went alone. The desert was silent that afternoon. Flat and hot. Even the wind seemed cautious. At the exact coordinates, Cal found what appeared to be the burned-out frame of a trailer. Half sunk into the earth. Rusted hinges, blackened siding, bones of a former life. There were remnants inside, scorched bedding, metal springs, and a padlocked trunk fused shut by heat. Next to it, buried halfway in sand, was a metal box. Cal opened it. Inside was a reel of old 8mm film. A crumpled photo. A set of keys. And a bus driver's badge. Desert Valley Transportation. Name, Jackie Burrows. Employee ID, 22091. Detective Dell was already working another angle. He'd run Burrows' name through every system he could find. DMV, Social Security, tax records. The man hadn't existed in any official form since 1998. But then a hit came in, not on the man, but on the badge number. 2 months ago, someone had used that badge to access the school bus depot after hours. Security footage confirmed it. A tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat, face hidden by shadows, entering bus 47 at 3:12 a.m., remaining inside for 11 minutes, and leaving. The camera caught him from behind, the long trench coat, the strange, stiff way he walked. But no face. The same night Toby had told a neighbor he heard someone inside the bus. The same week he started crying during the rides. Dell turned to Ramirez. "I think he's alive." She stared at the screen. "Who?" "Burrows. Or whatever name he's using now. And I think he's watching the boy." Ramirez paled. "Then Toby's not just a witness." Dell nodded grimly. "He's the next target." That night, while Dell worked the Burrows angle and Cal rewatched the footage from the desert, something happened that would shake everything loose. At 2:47 a.m., emergency services received a 911 call from Desert Willow Mobile Park. A neighbor reported hearing screaming from trailer number 19. When deputies arrived, they found the trailer empty. The door was swinging open. The floor had blood on it. The back window had been shattered. Toby was gone. And scrawled on the wall, in what looked like motor oil, were the words. "He shouldn't have looked." Part 6, Buried Truths. The scene at trailer number 19 was chaos. Detective Marcus Dell arrived minutes after the deputies secured the perimeter. The crime scene techs were already taking photographs, bagging samples, dusting for prints. The blood on the floor was fresh. Smears led from the kitchen to the broken rear window. But there were no signs of a struggle. No overturned furniture. No screams heard before or after. Just silence, and disappearance. Toby Bray had vanished. There was no sign of Donnie Kerr either. His truck was gone, his phone off. A be on the lookout, went out across 3 counties. Amber alerts lit up cell phones all the way to Nevada. But as the sun came up, the trail was already going cold. Dell stood in the middle of the tiny trailer, staring at the words on the wall. He shouldn't have looked. He didn't say it aloud, but he was thinking the same thing over and over. What exactly did Toby see, and who knew he saw it? By 10 a.m., Dell received a call from Cal Monroe. "I've got something. You'd better come see for yourself." He met Cal out past the old Silver Dagger mine, deep in the desert where phone reception disappeared and the wind whistled through rusted machinery. Cal led him to the burned trailer. "This place matched the coordinates from the notebook," Cal explained. "I found the badge, the film reel, and this." He handed over the photo from the box. It was wrinkled, edges curled. The image was old, a little boy playing in the sand, a woman in the background, smiling at the camera. The boy was Toby. The woman, unmistakably June Bray. But what froze Dell was what loomed in the corner of the frame. A tall man. Barely visible. Wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Watching. Not part of the family. Not smiling. Watching. "Who took this photo?" Dell whispered. Cal didn't answer. They both stared at the burned remains of the trailer. Inside, the scorched padlocked chest had cooled enough to be pried open. Inside were scraps of clothing, a man's jacket, and a photo album, charred at the edges. Dell opened it slowly. Page by page, it showed candid shots: June, Toby, schoolyards, bus stops, even the back of the old mobile park. None of them posed. All of them taken from a distance. Until the final page. It held a single photo. A recent one. Toby, sitting on the bus, crying, the same image captured by the onboard surveillance camera. Someone had been inside bus 47 again. Recently. And printed the photo before the police even saw it. Later that day, a call came in from an abandoned rest stop 30 miles west of town. A man had reported a vehicle matching Donnie Kerr's truck, parked at the edge of a dry lake bed. When deputies arrived, they found the truck doors open. The keys were still in the ignition. Blood on the steering wheel. And in the sand behind the truck, 2 sets of footprints. One large. One smaller. The small ones were dragged. Back at the sheriff's office, Ramirez made a breakthrough. She'd been running down all possible aliases linked to Jackie Burroughs and finally got a match on an expired library card from 1999. The name wasn't Burroughs. It was Gerald Blythe, initials, J.B. Address listed, a farmhouse long since torn down, but the name stuck. She cross-checked it with hospital intake logs from the same year and found something chilling. A patient admitted under that name, June Bray, had been brought in by a man claiming to be her common-law husband after a fall in the tub. The hospital had noted suspicious injuries, but she'd checked herself out the next day, before social services could intervene. Who signed the discharge paperwork? A man named Gerald Blythe. Same man who disappeared shortly after June was declared missing. Same initials scratched into both knives. Same obsession. By nightfall, a new tip came in, anonymous, scrambled caller. The voice was warped electronically. But the message was clear. You won't find the boy. Not unless you're willing to dig up everything. He knows. So do you. She remembered. That's why she had to go. This time, I'll finish it. Dell had no choice now. He assembled a full search team, helicopters, dogs, infrared. But in his gut, he knew this wasn't about finding Toby anymore. It was about what Toby remembered. What he'd seen when he was just a toddler. And what he'd buried, deep in the only place he felt safe, the place where June had once taken him every morning. Bus 47. The boy had grown up on that seat. And something had always been under it. Waiting. Watching. Listening. Part 7, Echoes in the Dust. The search grid stretched over 50 square miles of desert. Helicopters scanned the terrain by day, drones by night. Volunteers joined deputies, combing dry riverbeds, drainage culverts, and abandoned structures. Highway signs blinked amber with Toby's face. But as the third day passed, no trace of him surfaced. Then, an unexpected call came in from a freight operator. A long-haul conductor had stopped his train at a switching station outside Cactus Ridge, 2 hours south, and spotted something unusual. A boy's shoe, lying alone on the edge of the platform. Dell and Ramirez arrived on site by dusk. Near the platform, behind a generator shed, they found a crumpled scrap of fabric, part of Toby's pajama top. Faint drops of blood on a concrete slab. And a small, black audio recorder, half buried under dirt. Dell hit play. First, static. Then, a voice. Quiet, raspy, almost like a whisper filtered through steel. He remembers everything now. She hid it in the drawings. He drew her crying. Screaming. I watched. I was always watching. Click. Dell stood frozen. The second voice on the tape was Toby's. Faint. Afraid. I want my mom. She's in the dark. He said I was too little to tell. But I remember the blue light. I remember the dirt. I remember the sound she made. Dell's throat tightened. The boy wasn't just missing. He was being used. They brought in a forensic psychologist to study the sketchbook found earlier in the Bray trailer, the one filled with Toby's strange, sometimes terrifying crayon drawings. Most had been dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations. But under new analysis, they took on chilling meaning. One drawing, in particular, stood out now. It showed a bus, the windows glowing orange, and a woman buried halfway in sand, her hand reaching up from the earth. In the corner, a figure stood, tall, in black, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, holding a shovel. Children sometimes process trauma through images long before they have words, the psychologist said. I believe Toby witnessed something terrible when he was very small, and was told to forget. But the brain doesn't work like that. The trauma had been stored. Repressed. But never erased. Meanwhile, Cal Monroe was doing his own digging. Using the coordinates scrawled on the final page of the notebook, he found himself at a place known locally as the Saddle, a sunblasted ridge once used as an illegal dumping ground back in the 80s. What he found there wasn't trash. It was a gravel mound, flattened in the middle, rimmed by wooden stakes. Recent. Too recent. He got down on one knee and started clearing it with his hands. Less than an hour later, he uncovered a plastic tarp, rotted from the sun. And under that, a body. Not Toby. Not Donnie. This was an adult. Male. Shot twice in the chest. In his hand, a camcorder, half melted but still intact. And in his wallet, a driver's license. Donald Kerr. They recovered the video. It had no sound. But the footage was steady. Kerr had filmed himself walking through the desert, wind blowing, sun behind him, following GPS coordinates. Then the camera turned to a ridge. A tall man stepped into view. Wide-brimmed hat. Trench coat. The screen shook. Kerr's voice could be heard faintly as the camera tilted and tumbled. Then, 2 quick flashes. End of recording. Donnie was dead. Toby was still out there, possibly in the hands of someone who had killed before, and would kill again. Dell returned to the audio tape. He played it on loop, headphones in, volume up. On the 5th replay, he caught it, faint, buried beneath the whisper, in the background. A bell. 3 short chimes. Then a pause. Then one long chime. It was the exact bell pattern used in the now-defunct Mount Cain Monastery, a religious retreat shut down in 2006 after a fire wiped out half the building. Dell checked the coordinates. Mount Cain sat just 40 miles east of the Cactus Ridge train station. At sunrise, he, Ramirez, and a SWAT team moved in. They approached the crumbling monastery ruins with caution, floors unstable, beams blackened, rats scattering in the corners. They swept each hall. Then they heard it. Crying. Faint. Echoing. It led them into the sub-basement, behind a rusted metal door. Dell kicked it open. Inside was a small, dirt-floored chamber, a single flashlight hanging from the ceiling by its cord, swaying. In the corner, curled into himself, was Toby. Alive. Shivering. Wrapped in a dirty blanket. He was whispering something over and over. She's still here. She's in the dark. She's still here. They airlifted him out within the hour. He was dehydrated, bruised, but alive. Dell sat beside him in the helicopter, hand on the boy's shoulder. "Who did this to you?" he asked gently. Toby didn't answer right away. Then, through cracked lips, he whispered. "It wasn't just him. There were others." Part 8, The Last Stop. Toby spent a week in the hospital, guarded around the clock. He barely spoke, except in fragments. But what he did say was enough. The man in the hat, Gerald, as he sometimes called him, had kept him in the dark room and whispered stories every night. About truths people buried. About the place the road forgot. But it wasn't just Gerald. Toby described voices. Sometimes men, sometimes women. He said they came through the floor, or behind the walls. That they talked about his mother like she was still there. Dell feared hallucinations. But forensic crews who swept the Mount Cain monastery found evidence supporting the boy's words. At least 3 different sets of adult footprints in the basement dirt. A partially collapsed wall hiding a chamber filled with old clothing, worn children's toys, and several IDs of missing persons, including a girl who vanished in 1996 from a nearby county. The monastery hadn't been abandoned. It had been used. 2 weeks later, the breakthrough came. A set of fingerprints found inside the flashlight casing from Toby's prison matched someone not in any criminal database, but in a mental health registry. Benjamin Creed. Former Desert Valley transportation mechanic. Diagnosed schizophrenic. Last known address, abandoned trailer west of Calico Ridge. He had vanished in 2001. Records showed he worked closely with Jackie Burroughs. Creed had been obsessed with surveillance, creating hidden compartments, modified cameras, and even sound traps under bus seats. He had helped build the compartment where Toby found the knife. And when questioned years ago in a psych eval, he'd said, "Some of the buses talk. One of them won't shut up. The one with the crying boy under the floor." Dell realized then, it had never been about just one man. Burroughs had been the face. But behind him was something wider, stranger, a network of drifters, outcasts, fringe believers, people who moved from town to town with false IDs, old buses, and forgotten names. They weren't a cult in the usual sense. There was no leader, no sermons. Only a ritual. Find the child. Bury the memory. Hide in plain sight. They used buses because they moved between towns. They watched from distance. They waited. For children like Toby, the ones who saw too much. Remembered too well. The final clue came from Toby himself. A drawing he made in the hospital, this time in marker. It was crude, like always, but detailed. A dry lake bed, a swing set half buried in sand, and a row of 5 stones in a circle. Dell recognized the location, Greyhorse Sink, an old rest stop near the edge of state lines. The land was being prepared for redevelopment. Crews dug where Toby pointed. They found 3 shallow graves. All children. All missing for decades. One of them had a locket in her hand. Inscribed, J.B. June Bray. Toby was placed with relatives in another state under federal protection. He would later testify, quietly, and only once, to a special task force, helping identify members of the network still at large. His memories came back in dreams. Drawings. Sometimes screams. But one thing he said never changed. The man with the hat is gone. But someone still gets on the bus sometimes. I saw him again in the mirror once. He waved. Epilogue. Bus 47 was officially retired. Decommissioned. Stripped for parts. Crushed at a facility monitored by federal agents. And yet, 2 months later, a bus bearing the number 47 was spotted by a trucker on Route 19 near the desert border. No route. No logo. Just a single passenger inside. A boy, sitting near the back, looking out the window. And in the driver's seat. A tall man. Wearing a wide-brimmed hat.